Hi, I'm Cindy Abbott Letro for Behind the Camera, and we have two treats for you today. The first one is where we are, which is inside a place that most people don't get a chance to see, and that is the transmitter, which is, it was originally used by WKBW, 50,000 watt monster transmitter that broadcasts the signal of that radio station up and down the East Coast, and now is for WGR and WWKB. Yep. And my second treat is that Bob Koshinski, who is normally behind the camera shooting these segments, is here live and in person. So two treats today. And the other thing is we're going to be talking about documentaries, and I think oftentimes our focus is on feature films that are being shot in the Western New York area. But there truly is a very large and very active group of folks that do documentaries, and they can be as short as 1 and 2 minutes, and they can be a full half hour or hour long. And Bob is the producer of one of those documentaries that chronicles a very important part of history in Western New York. And I think, you know, so many of us, if we're interested in radio or TV, know about the War of the Worlds that happened in 1938, a radio broadcast that Orson Welles did. And that sort of, you know, is iconic in itself. Well, I think it was 30 years later,
1968,
WKBW on the radio did their own version of War of the Worlds, which was equally iconic. And then fast forward, 50 years later, Bob Koshinski did a documentary on the making of that 1968.
Yeah, 2018 was the 50th anniversary of WKBW Radio's War of the Worlds that was produced by Jefferson Kay, who was one of the most creative, maybe the most creative radio personality and management person in the history of Buffalo broadcasting.
Well, can I just stop you there? Yeah. Because I think that, you know, around the country, people know that people with the Orson Welles version thought it was real, thought that we were being invaded by Martians. It was a simulated radio broadcast, but a lot of people didn't get it. Did that happen in 1968 too?
It happened at a much smaller scale.
Okay.
Now, when I did this documentary in 2018, I did it as a tribute to what I thought. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to get into broadcasting, because I heard it as a 12-year-old, and I was really impressed with the radio drama, the let's play make-believe of it. I didn't think it was real. I knew it wasn't real. But many people who kind of joined the broadcast after it had started did not pay attention to the disclaimers that Jeff had run during the commercial break, saying this is only a radio drama. They thought there truly was some form of explosion on Grand Island, and the news coverage was so real, and they used real newsmen, including Channel 7's Irv Weinstein was part of the broadcast. People thought it was real, up to a point. The radio station got hundreds of calls from angry listeners once they were fooled, who didn't think it was very funny. Police agencies received plenty of calls thinking something really happened. It was funny, the Buffalo News and Courier Express, newspapers in Lockport, Niagara Falls, and surrounding areas, the next day wrote about the broadcast. The Buffalo newspapers did not, and the thinking was they had sent reporters to the scene, and when they got halfway there and realized this was all a hoax, they were pretty miffed and decided not to write the story. And they saw the radio station as somewhat of a competitor.
But what's interesting about it is it was so real that it did fool people, and that shows you the quality and really the creativity of what had been done.
The broadcast has been considered to be one of the very best reenactments of the original Orson Welles broadcast. So when I approached this documentary in 2018, I felt that not only talk about what happened in 1968, but chronicle all of the events since then and how the station and how that broadcast has been recognized.
Well, why don't we take a look at just a few of the clips from it, so you'll have, if you don't know about this, you'll get a better idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is WKBW at 1520 on your Buffalo dial.
Now radio comes alive. You're listening to KB.
This is Dan Everett speaking. In a moment, WKBW Radio will present H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. forewarned.
And finally, this story from the Mount Palomar Observatory in California. For the past 2 nights, astronomers have been closely watching a series of huge explosions that have been taking place on the surface of the planet Mars.
Do not call the station, do not call the police, do not call anyone. Everyone is informed of the events. The news department will keep you up to date. We're going to switch now to the KB newsroom for full in-depth coverage.
Henry, the only thing that I can tell you is it looks like a flying saucer with long, stilty legs, and it's moving at a fantastic rate.
Einstein. Plants they're all gone. But it's getting awfully close. Lights are all going out.
These are the icons of Buffalo. To be involved with something like this, it's amazing. And not only did they, attempt it, but what they pulled off was, pretty awesome.
It has to be probably one of the most famous Buffalo radio broadcasts of all time.
Without question, that probably was the biggest single broadcast event to ever happen in Buffalo.
We'll never see another day like that. The radio's changed too much. Those days are gone, but let's be glad we had them and they're still available to be heard.
From a production standpoint, from a dramatic standpoint, respect for the story standpoint, and all the other skill levels that we talk about, it's easily tied for first.
But fascinating and really well done. But you know what is very interesting about it is Jeff Kay. I mean, what a genius in a way to do this. And it was really a time in Buffalo broadcast history which was incredibly creative.
WKBW was the #1 station in town. They were top 40 rock and roll. They had personalities like Dan Neverth, Sandy Beach, before that Joey Reynolds. Some of the top names, Irv Weinstein did news on WKBW Radio. Jeff Kay came from Boston, WBZ in Boston. Initially he was a disc jockey and then he became the program director. And his creativity just jumped off the page. He was such an excellent writer. He later went on to be the morning man, the top morning man for WBEN Radio. He was also the voice of NFL Films.
Wow.
So he has a lengthy resume. And when Jeff took something on, he took it on all the way. And he decided to do his homage to the Orson Welles broadcast, to do one 30 years later. And initially when they did it, he wrote a script. And I have the actual original script. But he found out quickly that the radio newsmen were not radio actors. And it sounded pretty hokey, so they decided to just give them the details and the outline and let them be themselves and cover it with the factoids they were given and report on it as they actually would. And that's what kind of turned it around and made it so believable.
Well, and in fact with Irv had been a radio actor in another iteration, and he always loved acting, so that he was the perfect person for this.
When I interviewed Irv, I did a piece I was at WKBW Television with yourself, and in 1989 they allowed me to do, as sports director, which was really different, they allowed me to do a 6-minute piece that ran on AM Buffalo. And I interviewed Irv for that, and initially Irv, he didn't take the interview serious, but the more we started to talk about it, his juices got flowing and he started to talk about how cool it was to do it. And you're right. He said they didn't have to ask him more than once to play himself. I mean, who else would he rather play? So I go back to my idea of doing this, Cindy, was I wanted to do a long-form news story. And, there are local documentarians like John Padgett who do excellent work. I came up through the business doing news features. And back in the day, you weren't allowed to go longer than 90 seconds.
Sure.
So I wanted this to be long enough to air on public television, WNED TV, and then eventually, if it was worthy, to run it in an actual movie theater.
And that happened.
Yeah. The North Park Theater was gracious enough to run the documentary. Luckily, they had a digital projector and converted it to a Blu-ray DVD. And we had a great crowd show up that night in 2018. And then what was really cool about it was Sandy Beach and Dan Neverth and Pat Feldbaugh, who wasn't at KB at the time. He was in later years, but he knows quite a bit about it. We did a Q&A afterwards. It was a great night. It was my way of celebrating Halloween in 2018.
Well, you brought up an interesting point, because really documentaries do come from sort of the seed of a news story,
yes,
of something that is worthy of you paying attention to, and usually it's in a very short period, but if it's really worthy, you want to delve into it more.
And any documentary that's done on a period piece, you have to do recreations to make it watchable. Mm-hmm. You can't just show black and white photos of an event from 50 years ago. So you have to reenact some of it. Now, we're at a really, anybody who's a fan of Buffalo radio, this was the mecca. WKBW's transmitter was, KB radio transmitted up and down the eastern seaboard after dark. So people listen to rock and roll across the eastern seaboard, and it had an effect on college students that night. When they heard this in their dorm, they were calling home to check with their parents to see what was going on. But I wanted to not just pay homage to the radio broadcast, but also create something that was kind of a neat Halloween themed, which is why we're doing it in October this year with our
pumpkin
crop.
And our old WKBW.
Tim Clark spares no expense when we do these features.
The budget for dressing this set was phenomenal,
yeah.
Absolutely crazy. But did WKBW become a powerhouse because of the wattage of this station? Is that what created it?
No,
or was it because of the creativity that you talked about?
It was the personality-driven format that they came up with. First of all, they played music that was, became, in the late 50s and early 60s, rock and roll was the #1 format. So they played the right music, #1. They had the right personalities to come on, and Tommy Shannon, as I said, Joey Reynolds, later Sandy Beach, Dan Neverth. There was just a plethora of talent, and everybody else in town really, kind of played second fiddle to then WKBW, which lasted until FM became the dominant frequency, and then the AM signal kind of petered out.
So now, what happens at this place? I mean, what function does this? You still have it's still a major source of power. The broadcast.
Well, this is where WGR, the #1 sports radio station in town, carries the Bills and Sabres. That's transmitted from this location. WWKB now runs a sports-based satellite format. So it's not what it used to be, but it's extremely cool being in here, and just the history from these walls.
It's the whole story of this and the broadcast of that night had an impact on you. Have you met other people that have felt the same way about?
When I did the broadcast that night, there was a lot of radio geeks in the theater at the North Park, and then the second year we did it at the Aurora Theater, and even more people came out. Because the broadcast itself, anybody that's around now had to be very young when the original broadcast took place. And the broadcast also, they reran it in 1971 with a different open. They reran it again in 73 and 75. So everybody's got their own version of when they heard it. Everybody's got their own story of how they were affected by it.
But I had heard that there was a danger of that original tape of it being lost forever.
As luck would have it, over the years, different ownerships take over. Many times they don't have an appreciation for what came before, although they do own the rights. And you're right, Tom Atkins saved the original reel-to-reel tape in 1988. I was lucky enough, when I did the initial story on this in 1989, Dan Kriegler, who was the original engineer at WKBW and also director for that broadcast, gave me what they call the air check. And that was the reel-to-reel tape that they recorded off air. And that's going to end up in the Buffalo Broadcasters' possession.
It's interesting because as someone who had done live television for a long time, you did tape some of the things, but it's a magic that oftentimes just you do it that one time and it's gone forever. But thank goodness that there was a tape that recorded that, because otherwise we wouldn't be here talking today.
No, you're exactly right. And I give credit, first of all, I want to credit Tim Wenger, who's the operations guy over at Odyssey, who gave us permission to come in, and Nature Ace, the engineer who's standing by and making sure that everything goes right for us, and he put some props up for us. They didn't have to let us in this facility. This facility is not open to the public, as you said. So we were able to come in. And when I did the documentary, Tim Wanger was extremely helpful because I had to have access to their studios, I had to have access to their on-air talent. Then General Manager Greg Reed actually did a reader in the piece to be a part of it. So I think even today, radio broadcasters find the creativity of what took place before still to be magic.
Well, what did happen was magic, and you captured some of that magic, and hopefully we captured some of it today, Bob. It was great talking to you about something that shows us why this region is so iconic in what they've done in broadcasting and continues to do with its film industry. See you next time on Behind the Camera.